Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth chapter for the Python for Beginners course. We are looking at control structures. For this chapter, we will cover conditional statements and loops. Control structures determine the flow of execution in a program. So this allows for decision making and also helps us to avoid repetition of code. We have different types of control structures which are built in Python. So we have if else, if elif else, and nested condition, which falls under conditional statements. We also have for loop and while loop, and then we also have break, continue, and pass, which are used to control loops. So let's take a look at each of them. Conditional statements allows a program to execute only when a condition is true. So we mostly use conditional operators for conditional statements, and this returns true or false. For conditional statements, we have the if statements, the if else statements, and if elif else statements. For the if statements, the basic syntax is if condition and then the colon, and then you have the next line, you introduce an indent, and then you type in the statement. The if else statement is mostly used when the program or code must choose between two options. So for the syntax, we have if condition statement 1, and then you introduce the else, and then you bring in statement 2. For this example, we are looking at if statements and if else statements. For the first part, we've created a variable called age and we've assigned it to value 20. And then we've introduced the if statement. If age is greater or equal to 18, and then the code block follows. Print, you are eligible to vote. And for the second part, we have the if else statement, where we've created a variable called temperature and we've set it to 18. Then we've created the if else statement. So we have if temperature is greater than 25, it should display it is a hot day, else it should display it is a cool day. So now let's run this code and see what happens. For the output, you can see you are eligible to vote. This is because 20 is greater than 18, so it will display you are eligible to vote. And for the second part, 18 is less than 25, and so it's going to display it is a cool day. For the last part of conditional statements, we have the if elif else statements. So this is used when we are checking for multiple conditions, that is more than two conditions. So for the syntax, we have if condition 1, and then we have the statements for the next line, and then you go for elif condition 2. If you have other conditions to introduce, you also use the elif for that. So you can go condition 3, condition 4, and so on. And we end it with the else. You introduce else and the statements on the next line. In this example, we are looking at if elif else. So we've created a variable called score and we've set it to 75. And now we've created the if elif else statement. So we have if score is greater or equal to 90, it should display grade A. If the score is greater or equal to 80, it should display grade B. And if the score is greater or equal to 70, then it should display grade C. And then any other value apart from the conditions we've set, it should display grade D. So let's run this code and see what happens. For the output, we have grade C. This is because 75 is greater than 70, and so it's going to display grade C. So let's look at multiple conditions. For multiple conditions, we can use logical operators and or to write simple multi-condition code. So let's take a look at an example here. We have a variable called age, and we've assigned 20 to it. And then we have the second variable is citizen, which we have assigned to a boolean true. So for us to write the condition code on one line, we are going to use the logical operator AND. So we have if age greater than 18 and is citizen. And for the code block, we have print into brackets eligible to vote. So for this condition, we are going to check whether the age is greater than 18 and then if a citizen is equal to true. Because we know that for the logical operator end, it returns true only when both conditions are true. Let's run this code in our IDE and see the results. In this example, we are looking at multiple conditions using AND and OR, which are logical operators. For the first part, AND, we have a variable age, we've set it to 22, and then we have is underscore student, and we've set it to true, which is a boolean. We have the one line multiple condition. If age is less than 25 and a student, so with a student, it's going to check whether it's true or false. Since we've set a student to true, that part is going to be true. And so now we have age 22 and we are checking for the condition if the age is less than 25. If the age is less than 25 and a student is true, you should display eligible for student discounts. For the next part, we've created a variable called day and we've set it to Saturday as a string. If day has the string Saturday or if day has the string Sunday, it should display it is the weekend. Since you are using the logical operator OR, if any of the condition is true, it is going to display it is weekend. So now let's run the code and see what happened. For the first part, it has displayed eligible for student discounts. This is because the age, which was set to value 22, is less than 25 and a student is also true. For the second part, since day was set to Saturday as a string, it meets the condition, and so it's going to display it is the weekend. Let's take a look at nested if statements. We can embed if statements under other if statements. So for this example, we have the variable age, which is 20, and then we have citizen true. So we have the first if statement, which is if age is greater than 18. And then we have the second if statement, checking whether citizen is true. So we have if citizen, and then the code block is print eligible to vote. So we are going to first check whether the age is 18 and then check if citizen is true. So if citizen is true, then we are going to print eligible to vote. In this example, we are looking at nested if statements. This is where we embed an if statement under another if statement. So we've created two variables. We've set age to 20 and citizen to true. And for the nested if statement, we have if age is greater or equal to 18. We have the second if statement, if citizen, print eligible to vote. So we are first going to check if age is greater than 18. And then if that condition is met, we move ahead to check if citizen is true. And then we display eligible to vote. So let's run this code and see what happens. For the output, you can see eligible to vote. This is because age 20 is greater than 18 and also citizen is set to true. For all if statements, the code is run only if the condition is met. The for loop is one of the widely used control structures in Python. The for loops help us to iterate over sequences. So for sequences, we have lists, we have strings, we have range, which is we have a lower value and a higher value. We have sets, we have tuples, and we have dictionaries. So for the for loop syntax, we have the for keyword, and then we create a variable called item. So we are going to use this item to loop over the sequence that we have. So we have for item in sequence. So the sequence here can be list, string, range, set, tuple, or a dictionary. So anytime we loop through the sequence, we are going to store that value inside the item and then execute the code block for each of the item. So we have the item which is serving as a placeholder variable that takes the value of the current element. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, we are looking at for loop. So we have a variable created and we've assigned it to a list. So we have 12, 7, 5, 23, and 15. Then we have the second variable total, which is set to 0. We have our for loop code for num in numbers total plus equal to num. So here our item is num. So we've created this item to store each of the iterated elements so that we can run the code that is under the for loop on each of the items. So here the first element in the list being 12, we are going to store the 12 in num, and then we are going to run total is equal to total plus num. So here it will be 0 plus 12, and then we store the results back into total. So now the total will be updated to 12, and then we move to the next element, which is 7, store it in the num as an item, and perform the same operation to it. So we are going to loop over the list until we are done with all the elements, for which the last element is 15. You could see after that we will get the total value when we add all these elements in the list. We also have another variable created called average, where we are going to find the average of all the individual elements in the list. So we have total divided by, we have len into brackets numbers. So this function returns the number of elements inside the list. So we have 6 elements, so it's going to be the total number divided by 6. And now you're going to display the total and also the average. So let's run this code and see what happens. So for the output, we have the total to be 62, and then for the average we have 10.34. Let's move on to while loop. The while loop repeats code as long as the condition is true. So for the syntax, we have the while keyword, and then we have a condition in which we are checking. As long as the condition is true, the statement or the code block is going to run. The only problem that we need to avoid with while loop is encountering an infinite loop. So to avoid an infinite loop, we are going to need these basic parts. We need initialization, where we set a variable at the start, and then we have the condition where the program is going to check, and then we have the updates, where the variable should be able to change its value anytime the code runs, so that we can control the number of times the code runs as long as the condition is true. So let's take a look at an example where we use while loop. In this example, we are going to look at while loop. So we said the while loop runs the code as long as the condition is true. So here we've created a variable called count, and we have set it to 1. And then we have our while loop code. While count is less or equal to 10, we should display the number as a string and then the count value. Then after that, we should update the count variable. So we should update it by 1. So here we are using the count inside the while loop to control the number of code that is being run. So now let's run the code and see what happens. For the results, we can see number 1, number 2, up to number 10. So it means that anytime the code runs, it updates the count value by 1. So the count value will be updated until it is 10, and then the condition will not be met, because by then the count has a value of 10. It will make the condition to become false and the code will stop running. Now we have loop control statements. So these are keywords that we use to control our loops. So we have the break, which stops the loop immediately. We also have continue, which skips the rest of the current block code and jumps back to check condition. We also have the last keyword, which is pass. So this is mostly used as a placeholder where a control structure is being created and not used at a particular time. So anytime we use pass, the code runs but nothing happens. Let's take a look at an example. For this example, we are looking at break, continue, and pass. So for the first part, we have for num in range 1 and 10. So in the code block, so we are going to check if the num is having value 5. So if the num variable is having value 5, we should break out of the for loop. For the second part, we have for num in range 1 and 10. For the next line, we are going to divide the num by 2 and get the remainder. So if the remainder is equal to 0, we are going to skip displaying the results. So this will go back and then choose the next item and use the same process. For the last part, we have for num in range 1 and 6. So here we are using pass as a placeholder just because we don't have any code to put under the for loop. So let's run this code and see what happens. For the results, the first part we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have to iterate from 1 to 10 to print the values. But the moment the num is having the value 5, we broke out of the for loop. That's why we are having 1, 2, 3, and 4. For the second part, you could see we have only odd numbers being displayed. Condition is checking for an even number. So for even numbers, anytime we divide by 2, the remainder is 0. So for all even numbers, we are going to skip displaying their value. For the last part, because we used pass inside the for loop, the code will run alright, but then nothing will be displayed. So let's look at the situation where we create a completely empty for loop. Let's run this and see what happens. You can see in the results, we have error thrown back to us, which means after line 18, it expected a code block to be there, but it was left empty.